All right, everybody, I am going to be broadcasting live in just a moment. Just give me a second to set everything up. All right, I am live on YouTube. Let me check everything else. Bear with me, please. Sorry, this is still kind of new to me, so I'm just figuring it all out. All right, great. Looks like I'm live on YouTube and Twitch. I thought that I could do this to Facebook at the same time, but still trying to figure that out. Looks like that's not working quite yet, so no big deal. Facebook is super tricky. Yeah, that's probably not going to work. All right, anyway, so I'm going to be trying to do these live streams every Friday. Today I'm working on a t-shirt design for a company that does artwork for like oil rig workers. So they saw something that I did a couple years ago with some zombie oil rig workers, and they really liked it. So we're going to do something similar with skeletons. And I want to show you real quick sort of an idea of my process. What you're looking at right now is sort of the stage 2 pencil drawing. This right here is stage 1. This is what I show my client when I'm trying to sort of sell the idea. When they hire me, they give me an idea of what they want, and then I'll go and do a really quick, loose thumbnail drawing. So when you zoom in here, you can see that there's really not much detail. The anatomy is all wrong and all that. But that's not real important. I want to do something very quick that communicates the message so that they can tell me their feedback before I get really too invested in the design. So something like this, I think, probably took me like probably 25 minutes to draw, but there's probably another 15 minutes tacked onto there just to like gather the reference material and do the research into the client and all that. So now, once I got their feedback, then I go in and redraw it on top, but with more detail and fix my mistakes and things like that. Once I've done that, it's time to ink it. And I'm using Manga Studio 5 to ink because it's the best. And what I like to do is take my pencil drawing, convert it to blue, and then turn it way down so we can barely see the lines. Because I don't want to be tracing every pencil line, because that's sort of, if you do that, it sort of kills the energy of inking. But of course, I want to see enough of it that I have a foundation here. And I want to say, anybody who's new to my live streams, if anyone has any questions at all during the broadcast, please go ahead and let me know in the chat, and I will try to answer them. If I miss it, if I miss your comment, it's not because I'm ignoring you. It's just it's difficult to draw and look at the comments at the same time. So go ahead and maybe write it again, maybe in all caps, and we'll see if I can help you out. I'm trying to see here. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to bring up a chat box so I can see everybody. cool. Let's get started. I'm seeing the comments on YouTube right now. Having a little trouble seeing the other ones, but like I said, still trying to figure all this out. I see a couple comments here. Thanks for joining, guys. And let's go. So I'm going to start working on the areas just to warm up the areas that I'm most confident in. So let's start with this cool big face here. That's going to be easier because it's going to be symmetrical, so I can have my symmetry guide turned on here. There we go. Hey Matt, how you doing? Thanks for joining, buddy. Now this creature face here is supposed to be, it's going to be materializing out of the clouds or the smoke, I guess. That was the client's idea. So I'm going to try to do this in kind of loose flowing lines. And what I like to do with things that are symmetrical in this way is I'll just draw it with the symmetry ruler turned on, and then once everything is filled in, I'll go back, I'll turn the symmetry ruler off and go in and alter things on the left and right side so that it doesn't look perfectly symmetrical. This is going to be a full color design, so it's either going to be, I don't think it's heat transfer, which I'm glad because that looks kind of cheap usually. It's going to be a direct garment t-shirt, which is excellent. I'm excited about that because since I don't have to worry about silkscreen coloring, I can really go nuts with the colors and effects, and that I can do that a lot quicker. And it also looks a lot, I think the final result looks a lot better. It's quicker because if you've ever set up silkscreen designs, you really got to do a lot of planning. You've got to sit there and make sure that every color is layered on top of the other. You have to watch out for bleed and things, and you got to watch out for colors that are not all colors laid on top of each other are going to produce the same effect. So you got to, it's like a head game, like a puzzle you got to figure out, and that can be fun sometimes, but it gets exhausting if that's all you do. Hey, this question is from Shamir asking how to turn the symmetry ruler on and off. As far as the hotkey, the great thing about Manga Studio is that unlike Photoshop, it gives you access to every single aspect of the menu, options, tools, and actions. It gives you way more control than Photoshop. I know Photoshop, before you hit me on that, Photoshop does allow you to change a lot of the keyboard shortcuts, but there's a lot of things that it will not let you change. So as far as turning the symmetry ruler off, I have it programmed to one of my buttons on the Wacom. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm trying to find it for you. But I do not remember what that keyboard shortcut was. I think it's this. If you look at Snap to Special Ruler in View, I'm pretty sure that's what I'm turning on and off, because the symmetry ruler is classified as a special ruler, and if you just turn that on and off, that means you don't have to do any. You don't have to pause what you're doing to actually like turn off, or I mean, grab the ruler and like deactivate it in the menu or anything like that. You just hit this button. So I have a button over here. Very cool. I added this cool thing called Streamlab. A new friend of mine. I'm not sure if he'd want me to say his name or not, but he helped me out with all this streaming stuff. There's a lot to it, but I got this account at Streamlab, and what it'll do is it actually lets you put an overlay of all the chat from all the different things like Twitch and YouTube, and it's overlaid on the screen. So I'm seeing it now. I hope you guys are seeing it too. Again, trying to just figure this all out. Matt asks, are you adjusting the brush size each time you're clicking? Yeah, if you hear that click, I'm using this new Nostromo Orb Weaver gamepad, and those loud clicks are basically going up and down. I try not to mess with the brush size too much, because I found that if I do that a lot, I was doing that a lot in Photoshop, and I find that you don't need it to do it as much in Manga Studio because they give you a little more control over the size, you know. But there are times like when I want to handle a really large stroke, I'll need to jump it up like that and then go back down. I find that if I'm adjusting the stroke constantly, what happens is when the whole piece is finished, the line widths can be really inconsistent, and the whole piece becomes a little confusing. I would say what I'm drawing right now is kind of inspired by the artwork of Derek Riggs, the guy that did all the Iron Maiden covers. If you're unfamiliar with his art, you gotta check it out. It's awesome. I've read interviews with this guy, and he's done all the classic Iron Maiden covers. You know, with Eddie, their kind of zombie mascot, and there's so many times where their marketing company just has called him on Friday and has said, we need an album cover by Monday, you know. So I think it was Number of the Beast maybe by Iron Maiden. That was the story behind that. And that's amazing to me because it's something that is so iconic now. But for him, it was a weekend. And I hear a lot about that back in the day, I guess you would say, before digital art. And sometimes there are some projects where I actually would have preferred that, where a client called me and said, I need this in 3 days or 2 days. Here's what we want. Roll with it. Because the thing is, if somebody asks for something and they need it by Monday, pretty much what you give them is what they're going to get. And some projects that I do are people's hobbies, or their second businesses. And these projects, there's no timeline at all, which sounds nice because it's not a rush. But what ends up happening is that the client, maybe they'll take a week or two to get back to you on sketches. Maybe they're more likely to just go back and forth forever. Sometimes a really tight deadline can prevent the client from making too many changes just simply because there's no time. Hey, Nicholas asked a really flattering question here. I like those. So he's asking, how do I make the artwork look organic? I appreciate that, first of all, because I always think that my artwork looks a little stiff compared to people who ink on paper, So I'm always sensitive about that. I'm always trying to fight against that. One thing I like to do, well, for one, I don't use Adobe Illustrator, which is a vector program. And I think a lot of the digital art you see out there is done in Adobe Illustrator. And it's an excellent program, but for me, the lines are just a bit too clean. There's no room for kind of happy accidents or texture. So just the type of program you use can have a lot to do with it. The other thing is, I like to, for example, right here, I'll switch over to transparency, and whenever I draw a solid black or something, I like to just go in and mess it up a little bit, like this. I'm not sure how well you can see that. And then in the end, when I go to the coloring stage, I like to use a lot of brushes that have texture on them. I don't go crazy with it, but if you do it just enough and try to break up smooth gradients from happening, then that can go a long way to making it look more organic. And you'll always hear, if you're a digital artist, you'll always hear people say, like, is that digital or is it hand-drawn? Which always irks me a little bit because, look, I'm using my hand, my tiny little hand here, and I'm drawing. So I get it. I'm not dipping a pen. I'm not drawing on paper. I respect that tremendously because that's what I used to do, and I know that it can be a lot harder. But this is hand drawing too. That was my point. Hey Matt, to answer your question, yeah, I try to rely a lot more on pressure sensitivity just because I try to mimic the way I would actually draw on paper as much as possible. And when I'm inking on paper, I usually have, I'll show you. I just grabbed 3 random pens, but I'll typically have a nice brush pen that I do almost everything with, but then I have a really tiny fine point pen for things where this isn't going to cut it, and then I'll have something that for like more technical broad strokes. So when I'm changing the size of the pen like that, that's the way I view it, as like, okay, well, I'm getting out my micron right now. If that makes sense. Because the thing is, I'm actually much better, I think, at drawing on paper. The problem is, as a freelancer, it becomes a problem because there's so many times when you're working on a project where you need to move things around, you need to keep things layered, or maybe you need to. This happens a lot where I need to draw a logo, but I got to draw, the bear with a hat on, and then another version with a vest on, and then another version with a dress on or whatever. If I'm drawing on paper, that becomes really tricky. I got to use a light table or something, cut paper out, and do all these comps. I used to do stuff like that all the time with tracing paper, and it's a mess. It becomes really tricky if you're trying to do a lot of projects at once. Like with the teeth here, I want to have actually a really small brush. I struggle with teeth. But you don't want to give them a lot of weight. The other thing I like to do to keep things looking really organic is at the end, when I'm all finished, I have some splatter ink brushes and things that sometimes I'll just take over and add in certain spots, and that can sometimes make the difference. I have a question here. How do you turn on and off pressure sensitivity of a particular brush in Manga Studio? That's really easy. What you do, this brush I'm using right here, you look at your tool property menu, click the gear icon, and go to brush size. Click this little arrow right here. And right now I have it set to pen pressure, right? So if you turn that off, it's just a dead weight line, right? You turn pen pressure back on, now it works. Once you figure that out, you can adjust this curve, and that curve basically controls how it responds to pressure. I couldn't tell you why this curve works better for me. It just does. So it just was a lot of experimentation. So, you might want to copy this and see if it works for you, but there's a chance it won't. I don't know. I think I know some artists who do excellent work, let's see, like at a brush size of like 800 pixels. So check out the size of that. But they just press so softly, and they can control that. I can't. I press a lot. Let's see, I think I usually work it like that, like at 40 pixels. Yeah, that might even be too big, probably about 30. Matt, to answer your question, so Matt asks, how do you decide when to use a larger size brush versus multiple building strokes? I'm probably not, there's some things where I'm probably not like the best teacher on, because I don't, it seems like every time I draw something, I do it a tiny bit differently. I don't really put a lot of thought into it. Where I'm trying to build strokes here, I realized recently that that's the way I ink on paper. That's the way I pencil too. I just very slowly kind of build the line like this. I think a lot of inkers and pencilers do that, and I realized what I had been doing was trying to throw like a perfect line in one shot, and a lot of times it's impossible. Sometimes too, let me find an area where this will work, like right here. So this area here, I could try to go and do something like that, but to break up, when you're doing a drawing, you don't want it to look, you don't want people to see the strokes, you want people to see the shape of everything. So, or the form of what you're drawing. So right here, this is a good area where I need to just sort of build something, build this shape rather than a stroke. And again, later I'm going to go back in and break up. This is too symmetrical, right? So I'm going to go back in later, turn off the ruler, and mess up one side. But it really helps to do it symmetrical at first because then it's automatically balanced. And when I go back and edit things and add some more strokes and take things away, I can still maintain that balance, if that makes sense. Matt asks, how much of your ink style do you feel comes from you just doing your thing versus trained education? I would say, I guess all of it, because I didn't, well, not all of it. I didn't learn any of this in school, I should say. But I did watch a lot of DVDs. There's some great ones by Gnomon Workshop. There's an inking video by Joe Weems, I think is his name. And I learned a ton by watching that. Now, he wasn't inking digitally. He was inking on paper, but it's very much the same concept. From there, I remember learning a ton when I started watching speed painting videos on YouTube. So this was probably maybe 2014 or something like that, or not 14. It was way earlier than that, 2012-ish, let's say. I started watching a lot more t-shirt artists do their thing, and you start to get an idea of how they work and like building the strokes and other things. Now, one thing that I do that I really need to cut out is I often will spend, especially for t-shirts, I'll spend way too much time on certain details that will never get seen. Especially if I'm going to add a lot of color to this, a lot of this line work is probably wasted, but this is my favorite part, I just like to kind of get lost in it. Alright, so let's start working on some of the skeletons. Matt asks, or wait, before I answer your question, I'm going to keep this guy on a totally different layer, because what I'm going to do is this sky dude, this cloud dude, I want him to recede into the background. So he's going to be, the line art there will not be black. It'll be like a much lighter color. The whole thing is probably going to be like a sunset orange and red kind of deal. So this line art's probably going to be a dark red. But I'll keep that on a separate layer so that it'll be real easy to change the color later on. Alright, I got this. Oh, Matt, I'll get to your question in a second. I think I just knocked my camera. But I got this model skull from Amazon, and it was only like 25 bucks. And it's fantastic. It's so realistic looking. My kids drew all over it. But I use this all the time. Sorry, Matt. So Matt asked, would you suggest people just play around and find their own way of inking, or follow certain ink training? I think that it is really important to study people. Find your favorite inkers, and see what works for them. Get a lot of examples in front of you. Like some of my favorite ink style is kind of like the Image Comics, Spawn, very detailed, but also kind of loose. Like it's almost scribbly detail sometimes. And if you look at enough of that stuff long enough, you start to absorb it, I would think. But what you don't want to do, is let it get. I guess. All right. Let me figure out how to say this. You don't want to have something that gets in between your brain and your hand. You know, when it's time to actually sit down and ink or draw, you need to be able to let some things go on autopilot a bit. So I think if you're sitting there trying to think every stroke, then what happens is it's kind of like, I sort of used to play racquetball, right? So any sport, you can probably use this analogy, but with racquetball, I sucked at it, but when I didn't suck too bad, like when I was trying to serve the ball, it's when you're not thinking about it. You know, some of your best serves just happen when you just let things take over. But when I sit there and think, okay, all right, you gotta lean into this step here, and then use your left leg to do this and to do that, it doesn't work. So when you're asking, should you try to just develop on your own, or follow other artists' examples, or follow their teachings? I think the best way forward is just in your free time when you're not drawing. You know, read their books, look at the art, study it, absorb it. But then when it's time to draw, I don't really have a lot of that. Right now I have some reference open, like for a skeleton hand, because those are tricky to draw, and a skull and things like that. But I don't have I don't have any ink drawings open. You know, I don't have technique sheets or anything like that, because it just comes with a lot of practice, and certainly I'm far from an expert in it. You know, to me the experts are what the heck is his name? Like, oh man, I'm blanking on Jim Davis, right? The guy who drew Mad Comics. Is that Jim Davis? Ugh, it's like one of my favorite artists. I can't remember his name, but those guys are just like classical geniuses, and I think that's his name. Anyway, sorry. I hope I answered your question. Get my paint bucket. That's one of my favorite things about digital inking, is just being able to quickly fill in shapes. When you're inking on paper, you usually have to go over an area like that twice. And sorry about the terrible music. I'm trying to do this more legitimately, the live streaming. And what happens is, if you play music in the background, a lot of times Facebook or YouTube can pick up on that, and any copywritten music, and they just either penalize you or take down the stream, or send people to your house and kill your family or something like that. So I got a bunch of license-free music, and it's pretty generic. It sounds like a like a corporate board meeting over here, or a prescription drug commercial. I've talked about this a bunch before, especially when doing a t-shirt design that really needs to work, like seeing it from a distance. You really want to make sure that you don't zoom in too closely. And I might even be zoomed in too closely on this. So I'm at like 33%. So if you think about it, the t-shirt would probably be printed like this. So what you're seeing now is probably about the size that it would be printed. So you usually don't want to zoom in twice that. That's too much. And definitely not beyond. Like if I'm sitting here working like this, then I would be working on a skull that's going to end up being maybe an inch tall. So you don't want to do that. Because what will happen is you'll end up spending hours on something, and it'll probably look pretty awesome zoomed in, and then you zoom out and you realize that all your lines are so thin that you can't even see them anyway. So thanks for the question, Street Gremlin. You're asking, is Clip Studio a new name of manga or something different? This is really confusing, and shame on Smith Micro for doing this. But Clip Studio Paint and Manga Studio are exactly the same program in every single way. The only difference is just how it's delivered. So if you buy the program on a disc, it's called Manga Studio 5. If you buy it as a digital download now, it's called Clip Studio Paint. And I think they've made an effort now to make everything under the Clip. It's all called Clip Studio Paint now, I believe. But unfortunately, I think I talk about this every time, the name Clip Studio Paint is kind of terrible. And so is Manga Studio, really, because I think it just turned off all the artists who don't draw manga, and which I'm one of them. I don't read it. No, sir, I don't like it. So I think that's unfortunate, and I think Clip Studio Paint is also unfortunate because it sounds sort of generic, I think. Here with his eyes, I was going to make them, I think I'm going to make them glow during the color stage. Hey, what's up, Randy? I told you if you let me live with you, I will move to North Carolina. Bringing my family with me is optional. They'll understand. Hey, Hugo, I appreciate the compliment. Hugo is asking me, how much time would you say it took you for you to get this inking style? I wish I had. It would be fun to bring up some of my old stuff. Maybe I'll prepare that later. What's funny is the more I see my old stuff, like even the stuff I did in high school, even though I believe I'm much more skilled now, there's still so many things that I draw the same way that I did then. You know, so I think your style is just, it's not something, it's not like a skill that you learn. Your style is just you. You know, it's just how you have trained yourself to handle certain problems. Um, and this might be repetitive, I hope, because I feel like I said this on a different a different stream, but one of my favorite artists once said that like your style is basically, it's how you fix your own mistakes. So, for instance, if you are not good at drawing feet, which, you know, who is, you come up with a way to draw feet that kind of cheats, you know. And same with, you know, I do that with fingers and stuff like that too. My fingers are kind of a little more cartoonish. I draw sort of square fingernails, and it's just sort of a way where that was the solution my brain came up with. It's like, well, you're not going to pull this off, so let's try this, you know. And you do it once and it works, and then you do it again. That's your visual vocabulary, you know. But again, I think if you're an artist trying to develop a style, you want to make sure that it's something that it's based on something you love. My style looks like this, I think, for a reason. It's because I grew up on comics and heavy metal covers. You know, that's what I liked. It would probably be pretty economical for me to draw something without line art, something that's more, you know, vector shapes and things like that, and because there's actually a much bigger market for that. But it's just not what I enjoy, and it's not what I'm good at either. So it just doesn't happen. I'm going to try to draw the skeleton hand. So I got a picture up on another screen here. Thanks for all the questions. I really appreciate it, because I usually have something to talk about, but today I couldn't think of anything really. So that's really helpful. So keep them coming if there's anything I can help with. So this is an old trick, but you know, you always want to have the outline of your shape of the form a thicker line than what's inside. You know, so you'll see me as I'm outlining these fingers, the line is much thicker, and then any forms inside that shape gets a much thinner line. And a lot of those lines, those little lines I just drew, they really probably were too small. So you gotta be careful of that. Not too small, it's not gonna cause problems in the design, but if you're working with a lot of lines that don't end up really getting printed well or at all, then it can kind of take away from the design and waste your time too. Hi, Tammy. So Hugo asking me if I've ever made a illustration for a tattoo. I've had a lot of people find my artwork online and then tattoo it usually without asking, and then they send me a picture of it, and so that's extremely flattering, first of all. But second of all, I wish they had asked, because usually the tattoo does not look very good. Because typically what they'll do is they'll just print it out from the internet, and the resolution is really terrible. And they forget that a tattoo artist, to make a really good tattoo, they need a line art version of the artwork as well, because that's the flash that they will, the pattern that they'll rub on your skin, the outlines, and then they use the color version for reference, right? So what a lot of these people are doing is they will just take in some low-res image that they found on my website or somewhere, and then the final result of the tattoo is kind of underwhelming. It could have been a lot better, I think, if they had just asked me, and I would have gladly sent them the high-res image for a small fee, of course, because this is my job. But as far as have I ever designed artwork specifically for a tattoo, only a couple times, and there's a couple reasons for that. One, usually the quote that I give to design a tattoo is too high for people, which I understand, because just the act of getting the tattoo can be very expensive. And second, wait. Oh man, I got confused. Maybe that was the only reason. So people sometimes can't afford it. The other reason really is that you really want to have, if possible, you want to have the tattoo artist who is doing the artwork on you, you want them to design your tattoo. Because anytime you get an artist and tell them to draw like another artist, they're not going to be passionate about it. It's going to be kind of alien to them. It's going to be a new style that's not theirs. All they're going to be doing is copying something. And I believe that most like really great tattoo artists with a reputation, that they probably aren't going to want to do, and may just turn you down. They're not going to want you to do, they don't want to tattoo another artist's artwork. Hey, thanks, Tammy. Talking about my brushes, I'm gonna have a volume 3, hopefully by the end of the year. There were like 80 brushes that I created when I made volume 2. So I just need to make a couple more, or 80 extra brushes, I mean. And I got to make a few more. This time I'm going to try, since I've already sort of covered like inking and penciling, I want to try to do more things that have to do with like textures or special effects, things like that, patterns. Because Manga Studio's brush engine is so cool in that it allows you to create brushes from full color graphics. So Hugo's asking, have I ever thought about working with tattoos, like as a tattooist? I really haven't. I don't even have a tattoo, because I keep thinking about getting one, and I will get one soon, but I've never been able to decide on what to get. And then, to be honest, I get a little nervous about whether the tattoo artist could do it justice, you know? Thinking about being a tattoo artist, there's a couple problems. One, I'm not very cool at all, and I think you have to be pretty cool to be a tattoo artist. Second, I'm not really can I say this? Like, I don't know if my hand, I don't know if I have a steady enough hand to do that kind of work. You know, a lot of what you're seeing digitally. Is probably being helped by the fact that it is digital and I can undo and take away from the art. And then the other thing too is that's a very different kind of life. I've got 2 kids and my wife works with me, so the whole business, my whole family really is riding on this service business, just doing artwork for other people. And being a tattoo artist is a lot like being a dentist. You know, like you have to have a shop, you got to have appointments filled up, and you're really only making money as people make appointments, and you have to do it locally too. So my advantage is that I can work with people all over the world, you know, and that's been fantastic because there have been times when things are slower in this country, and then they'll pick up in another, you know, so I can sort of piggyback off of that. And it works the other way too. Like there are some people I work with in Australia, but occasionally our dollar becomes too valuable and that prices me out of their market, you know, so it's all delicately balanced. Anyway, where I live, there's already a few tattoo shops, and I would have to move most definitely. I'd have to move to an area where there's more people and more people who are willing to maybe pay more. Because I know you can make a lot of money doing tattoos, but it's like anything where you can make a lot of money. Like you can make a lot of money as a YouTuber, right? But most of them don't. 90% of them do not. They do fine, but the other thing is too. Sorry, I'm really drawing this question out. It's a good question though. I really enjoy the idea of drawing or creating something, even if it's just a logo, that is then going to be used on a product, and doing all kinds of different things. Like last week, I was working on frisbee designs for disc golf. I don't know if you're familiar with disc golf or not, but they were a lot of fun, and I was just drawing illustrations for these special edition discs, and they're printed right on it. That's something that before that client contacted me, I didn't even know was even a possibility, right? So I feel like if I were a tattoo artist, I would get bored very quickly. And the other thing is, last thing, my summer job long ago was working as a henna tattoo artist on the beach. So people would line up and I would draw like stupid butterflies and hearts and Star Wars symbols on their overweight butts and whatever. And that got old very fast because everybody wanted kind of the same things. There weren't a lot of real cool creative ideas. So, I don't know. I don't think it's for me. Anyway, good question. Hey, to answer Gimlet's question, you're asking me why is my cursor like a pencil? That's easy to change. You just go to, let's see, I think it's in Preferences, Cursor, and then you can change it to, in my case, I changed it to Tool Specific for the pen type cursor. You can do all kinds of different things, like the brush size or a single pixel dot. I really like the pen cursor because, one, it instantly kind of tells me what tool I'm using, just visually. And the other reason is, since I'm using a pen to draw directly on the screen, the cursor really stays out of my way. Like as you can see I guess you can see my screen. or I mean the camera filming me drawing, the pen covers up everything except for the little precise point. So that's why I like it. And when I'm using the paintbrush, I tend to use the circle because that's when it's more important to see the full size of the brush. The people at Smith Micro, they're really good people. The people who make Manga Studio, we're trying to work something out where I do like a webinar with them, but we're just trying to figure out what to do it on because there's already so many good ones out there. I feel like a lot of the subjects have already been taken. If anybody listening has any ideas on what you might want to hear me talk about or teach or try to stumble through, I'd be happy to hear it. They had suggested maybe walking through logo design using Manga Studio, but the problem with that is I use like half and half Photoshop, or probably 30-30. So I use Photoshop, Illustrator, and Manga Studio all in conjunction to make a logo. And they probably don't want me doing a webinar telling them to go get Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator. But as you know, anybody who uses Manga Studio, you know that the text tool is just absolutely terrible in this program. So I don't do any of the text here in Manga Studio. I got to do all that in Photoshop or Illustrator. But I always do most of the drawing here. This is one of the things I love about digital art, is just being able to ink over things and then erase. I probably should have looked at a picture of an actual wrench. They're probably going to kill me on that. Are there any oil workers listening? Can help me tell me what kind of wrench? All right. Yeah, hey Gimlet, you asked me to do it on Twitch. I'm broadcasting live on Twitch right now at the same time. If you use Twitch, you can check out my channel. The problem with Twitch is I have no following there at all. I mean, I don't have much of a following on YouTube either, but it's hard to get people to watch me on Twitch. So I like Twitch as a platform. It seems cool, but I really don't see a lot of artists on there yet. It seems to be still mostly video games, computer games, that kind of stuff. Um, and Matt, I appreciate your suggestion. So, talking about the way I mask in things and individual colors and stuff. Um, Again, I never know if I'm the right teacher for that because my method changes every time. Not every time, but a lot. I think it's because, and you and I are the same in this area, where we do a lot of different styles for different clients. So there will be some days when I'm working on something really dark like this, but then I'll work on a children's book the next day, you know. And those two things are colored very, very differently. Just completely different techniques. All right, so let's see. So Lewis Fox is asking me what brushes did I start with. So I really liked. I was a fan of Manga Studio 4. I don't know if anyone has ever used that, but I felt like their brushes, their inking brushes, were actually a lot better than the defaults that came with Manga Studio 5. So early on, I found out that you can actually import the brushes from Manga Studio 4 into 5, and I did that and kind of tweaked them a little bit. And once you do, they behave pretty similarly, and I was happy with those for a while. I have Ray Frendon's brushes, which I've recommended a lot, and then. But now I use mostly my brushes or Ray Frendon's brushes. I go back and forth on it. Like right now, I've been using one of Ray Frendon's brushes. If I wasn't using his, I would probably use. Where are you? Probably this Fat Maru brush. This is a good one for messier looks. It's probably what I'd be using it for. I've downloaded a lot of free brushes as well. You'll find them on the internet, and I don't think any of them have been worth using. So my recommendation, like with Ray Frendon's brushes, they're pretty cheap. If you're going to be using this for your business, just buy them. It sounds like you already have my brushes, which I appreciate. Now you can see I'm working pretty zoomed out here. I like to do that, as I said earlier, because it doesn't waste my time quite as much, and I get a much broader sense of what the whole illustration looks like. Because if you think about it, when you're inking on paper, that's the advantage, is that you've got this like 11 by 17 bristle paper in front of you. You're seeing constantly the entire image. So working zoomed out, the disadvantage, of course, is that sometimes you lose a little control over your brush, but normally that's not a problem because any extra control it gives you from zooming way in, it's going to be lost anyway, those details, you know. So Matt, great question. Matt is asking me, do you get the shirt designed separated for your clients, or do you give them the file and let them handle it all? What kind of file do you send them? For a design like this, it's going to be full color, so luckily I don't have to worry about any of that. I'm just going to send them a Photoshop file that has things kind of layered, because sometimes they're still going to need things, but in general I don't have to worry about much of that. Just so much more fun. There are a lot of times where a client needs me to separate the colors, and in those cases, I can only do that if the design is like 3 colors, 4 colors, 5 or 6, but nothing fancy. You know, I can do a lot of detail, but I can't separate things that have a ton of mixed colors and things like that, because that's a skill in of itself. But I will, I still send it as a PSD, but typically I'll have each color on its own layer. Then there are times where, this is usually smaller clients. I found that the bigger clients, they don't even want you messing with the separation because they have their own team of people or their own separator guy that they want to handle it, which is great. But it's usually the smaller companies that need you to send them a print-ready file, and that means I actually have to separate the colors into channels in Photoshop and save it as a oh shoot, what's it called? I think it's like a .SPS file, and that can actually be opened up in Illustrator, and then you can just print right to the screens from that. That's a huge pain in the ass, and I usually don't do that unless they ask for it, and they typically don't. A lot of my clients are hiring me for full color designs, I've noticed, which is awesome. That used to be too expensive to really be an option to print direct to garment. The costs have come way down though, and a lot of my clients, they find me because they like my full color artwork, so that's what we end up going with. But I hope that answers your question. Shamir, I'll get to your question, Cthulhu here. Ask me, which playlist do you play often? I said at the beginning of the stream, right now I'm playing like just license-free music because I was having trouble with Facebook or YouTube would pick up the like Iron Maiden in the background, and they'd shut down the stream or something. So Now I'm listening to license-free music, which is exactly like you would think it is, just okay enough. But this is from a guy named Ben Sound. He has a website for license-free music, and it's pretty good, I think, for what it is. All right, so I got a question here. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but Cthulhu Mo is asking me, how much do I charge? You're a freelance artist, and you've designed tattoos for people lately, and you were unsure about what to charge. So, oh, thanks. Is anybody hearing? I actually don't have a microphone. Is anybody hearing rumbling or anything like that? But anyway, I'll look into that. Thanks. Okay, so to answer your question, what do you charge? I will tell you that I've been doing this for many years now. I've been a full-time freelancer for close to 6 years, and before that I was doing freelance on the side for probably another 6, and I'm still trying to figure it out. I wish it was as easy as just giving you a number on what you should charge, but what you need to do is first, of course, calculate what your costs are, what your expenses are to live, right? And figure out then how long it usually takes you to do artwork. If it takes you 8 hours to do a piece, it takes me somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. I'd say 6 to 10 hours to do a project. So you have to figure out, well, how many of those can you do in a week? And then you figure out how much money you need in a week. And once you figure those things out, that becomes your minimum, right? If it turns out you need $300 in a day, and it takes you a day to do a project, then that's your minimum charge. Never go below it. I say never, like I've never done it, but you try to almost never go below it. Once you have your minimum charge set up, then you just start basing your price on your demand, okay? So if you find yourself booked up for a couple weeks and somebody asks you for a new project and all you're charging is $300, then charge that guy $400, see what he says. If he goes for that, you might learn that $300 was too cheap this whole time, then keep raising it. So right now I'm charging, and I'm not going to give a number, but I'm charging twice the amount, sometimes 3 times the amount that I was probably 3 years ago. So what you want to do is just make sure that you are always growing. You are always raising that price. Then what will happen is you'll get to the point where maybe you're booked up for a month and things are looking good. You've been doing it for a while, and you kind of have a sense that projects are just going to keep coming. You have a lot of repeat customers. Then you'll get some things that you kind of don't want to do that much. And that's where you start throwing out what you think are really high numbers. Throw out a quote for $1,500, for $2,000, just see what happens. And you got to be prepared. You got to be prepared to lose jobs too. That's really important. For us, we only get, I think, 20% of the jobs. When people fill out a new quote request form, there's only a 1 in 5 chance that we even get that job. Now, I'm not saying go live by that number, but if you're paying the bill, or not just paying the bills, you want to do more than that. But if you're making a living and things are going well, then you shouldn't sweat the jobs you're losing. Just focus on the jobs you're getting. If you're giving out quotes and 90% of the people you give a quote to are saying yes, then I'm guessing that means that you're not charging enough. You also want to look for people who say, when you send quotes and they say, great, or that's a good price or something like that, then you probably need to charge more. What you want is sort of a reluctant, yeah, okay, that was more than my budget, but your artwork is worth it, or something like that, or fair. Some people will say that's a fair price. When people say fair price, I think you're on the right track, because you don't want people excited about your price. You want people. You want to find their budget and push the limit of it. Man, this is gonna be a long answer, but there's lots of guides out there that you could find on pricing, but you need to remember that a lot of these pricing guides, like the Graphic Artists Guild book, they were compiled from a lot of artists who work for ad agencies, and a lot of these guys are typically used to working with budgets of like 10, they're designing a logo for $15,000 or something like that. And I've never designed a logo for $15,000, but that's in the guidebook. So look at those guidebooks, but just take it with a grain of salt. I screwed up that nose pretty bad. Let's go back and fix that. So I'm gonna end the live stream in about 5 minutes here. So if anybody has any last questions, please shoot them my way. I hope that the sound of the microphone has been fixed. I'm not sure. It's hard. I can't hear it. All right. Anyway, so I don't know how long we've been streaming. Probably about an hour. I probably have another hour to go in this as I do the other parts, and then I'm going to send the ink drawing to the client for their approval before I start coloring. So thanks a lot for coming, everybody, and thanks for your questions. If I didn't answer anything, feel free to put it in the comments, and I will try to answer it as soon as I can. All right. All right, thanks a lot. Bye.